In defense, it is vital that we can explain how and why decisions are made and how and why events occur. This transparency will reinforce the trust that people have in defense. In the same way, decisions and events that occur via robotics, autonomous systems, and artificial intelligence or RAS-AI must be transparent and explainable. This is why Defense identified traceability as one of the 5 facets for ethical AI. This video is part of a series that explores the facets, which are responsibility, governance, trust, law, and traceability. This video considers traceability and RAS-AI from the perspective of defense personnel. It uses examples from Army use of unmanned ground vehicles and a fictional scenario called Striking Blind to understand the importance of embedding traceability at the early stages to help us make sure we can record and audit different aspects of RAS-AI. In the Australian Army Laverack Barracks, Corporal Lachlan Jones is working on developing new robotic and autonomous systems. As part of this work, he developed an app for a system that helps soldiers send reports.
I'm Corporal Jones. I'm a member of a support company working in 1RAR's innovation space. So for the last 12 months, I've been working on photogrammetry and point cloud data that can be generated and disseminated on the tactical edge of the battle space to enhance our section commanders' level of awareness.
Traceability is an essential aspect of his work. Traceability is concerned with tracking and reviewing the use of the RAS-AI by identifying and maintaining records on events and information created and used by the system. Transparent record keeping enables traceability, which is important as it allows us to address the ethical and legal aspects of the system and review events when poor outcomes happen.
When RAS-AI can automatically process data, it may place a low significance on potentially important information that could change the outcome of a mission. I think trusting something that can potentially make decisions without any human input can be hard, but now through working with autonomous programs that collate and process data, I now trust those to process data without any input, whereas originally I would constantly track them and monitor them.
Defense is proactively considering the ethical issues that may arise with RAS-AI and working to make sure these technologies are used within traceable systems of control. Australian Chief Defence Scientist Tanya Munro has said this consideration of ethical issues should occur in parallel with technical development.
My view is that traceability is central to the social licence we have as defence to use AI, and thus it is essential. We may not now, today, have the full knowledge we will need into the future to be able to do that tracing. But I put it to you that we need to make that a focus. And the reason is, the Defence Organisation has to work on a lessons learnt principle. It's not acceptable for us to have an outcome in conflict or even in grey zone where we can't understand how the data led to the information on which a commander or someone in the field made a decision. So traceability is core. What it does is it really focuses the mind on the interface between the human and the AI. How far does the human have to be into the loop or on the loop in order to give us that traceability? And how can we extract the lessons learned from these trials, exercises, and real conflicts? It's about risk. We take on risk anytime we use a technology, whether that be a piece of military hardware or a software solution. And in understanding how we ethically use force and generate force, we have to be able to go through lessons learned and improve the way we use it in the future. So traceability is king. Engendering trust requires 2 core elements. The first is transparency. That awareness and understanding of how data is used by AI to provide information to decision makers. The second is verification. The ability to be able to trace through the system how those AI algorithms produce outcomes. With transparency and validation, we can build layers of trust into our system.
In the situation described by the 2021 Perry Group's Striking Blind story, the Mandela system is opaque by design, because of intellectual property rights and export control. Within this story, the lack of transparency around how the algorithm learns from its environment and resulting changes in assessments of the battle space has severe consequences.
I'm Dominic Tracy. I'm a Logistics Ordnance Corps major with a petroleum background, and I was involved in the development of Striking Blind, which was a Perry Group paper looking at AI for the future and implementation in the battle space. So within Striking Blind, we looked at autonomous automated systems, and we called it the Mandela system. And it was a decision support tool within a fighter pilot or the kill chain. What we wanted to look at was the ethics behind that and how that AI could change the battle space for the better in the first instance, but then some of the risks that may not be as obvious, particularly when it was introduced into service. Unfortunately for humans, it takes us a lot longer to go through that process to test and evaluate an AI. And then for humans who are involved in that situation, the shorter the period of time they have to consider information, the less information that they can actually filter through to make that decision. So, and those are the kind of areas where AI has potential to increase our lethality on the battlefield, but is where it has the greatest risk if we don't understand how it makes those decisions. Some of the framework or governance that has to go around AI is firstly understanding how it makes the decisions to start with, and then secondly, testing and evaluation post any decision that is made by an AI, or recommendation, more importantly, made by an AI, before we trust those systems.
The fictional Mandela system uses data from mobile phones, Wi-Fi routers, and other sources to identify who is present in the battle space. Unfortunately, this data is corrupted by deliberate spoofing, and over time, the Mandela system learns to treat this fake information as an accurate representation of who is present.
So within Striking Blind, our main protagonist, Charles, engages ground targets based on a feed from the AI saying there is a legitimate target. And what leads up to that is a ground commander calling for fire support. The AI system identifies a group of targets that are legitimate targets and they're engaged. What it doesn't do is translate that into a secondary target very well. So the same pattern of behavior is identified through a secondary group, which turns out to be a civilian group. And then the same pilot is given the same information feed, makes the same decision based on that information feed. However, it strikes an illegitimate target and causes unacceptable collateral damage.
In the Striking Blind story, the fictional AI identifies an enemy target. However, it later emerges that the people targeted and harmed were refugees fleeing the conflict occurring in the scenario. This story illustrates why transparency in RAS-AI systems is vital.
Sean Hamilton. I'm a pilot with experience on Super Hornets, Classic Hornets, and a little bit of time flying remote piloted aircraft. It learnt that spoofing was a normal part of the environment and expected to be there, so it ceased to question the validity of the transmissions that it was sensing. And it slowly moved down a learning path which was adverse and resulted in an adverse consequence. So what we need to be able to do is to be able to continuously monitor the AI to figure out how exactly it's making decisions so that we can detect these sort of issues coming up and we can maintain oversight of the learning algorithms.
Monitoring RAS-AI will require technical skill, at least in the near term. Partnerships with technology developers and training for commanders and operators will be an important pathway to enabling this aspect of traceability.
Now, these learning algorithms, they're going to be very complicated. It's going to require a strong partnership with industry. So you would imagine the developer of the AI, so in this particular case, we called it Northwell Atomics, would need to be embedded with the AI, helping us maintain oversight of it.
Users of AI will need to determine how to provide these levels of explanation using international standards and best practices. Traceability also includes lookup information for commanders and operators. They will need to be able to access and use the information on the RAS-AI in question, and through this understand the technology's capabilities and limitations. The Australian Army has taken a learn-by-doing approach to RAS-AI, with some systems piloted in trials. Major Chris Hall has worked on trials that use robotic vehicles for the resupply of combat teams and unmanned aerial systems for reconnaissance and resupply. He is exploring the best ways to prepare future Army leaders to work alongside machines.
Commanders will need a general understanding of the capabilities and the likely actions of a RAS-AI system without understanding all the technical aspects behind it. At a user level, something like an activity log might be useful. At a commander's level, something like the aggregated data from all the systems available in their force might be useful. But we can often explain these things in non-technical terms. If you look at a book like iRobot, it does an excellent job of explaining autonomous decision making and where that can go wrong without pages of code. So there are other tools out there that we can use to teach commanders and users how a RAS-AI system will likely act.
Corporal Jones has experience responding to feedback from an operator's perspective. This feedback process is important if Army is to build technology that is as useful as possible for them.
Soldiers need a comprehensive training package to enable them to operate RAS-AI in complex and stressful situations. The limits can be understood and communicated early on in soldiers' careers when they first join the Army and all the way through their employment training, as well as continuation training within the workspace.
Providing this information is not just about helping our commanders and operators to use RAS-AI to their best effect. It also ensures that we are complying with our legal obligations. Damien Copeland is a Senior Research Fellow in the University of Queensland Law and Future of War Group. Damien's research focuses on the application of export control, arms trade and sanctions regimes relevant to the export and brokering of trusted autonomous military systems and associated technology.
So it's important in terms of an information requirement for a commander to have sufficient information to use AI to achieve a military objective. Now, part of that is that the commander is the responsible person, not the AI. So the law applies and holds their commander accountable and others for the lawful use of the AI, which is one of the many tools that may be available to a commander in any particular situation.
RAS-AI also present an opportunity to improve existing processes for collecting information during conflict for assessment or review.
So my name is Lauren Sanders and I am a Doctor of International Criminal Law. I've spent 20 years in the military as both a signals officer and a legal officer, and my area of expertise is largely operational law and the application of international humanitarian law to ADF operations. I think there's many opportunities for us in developing new technologies from a defence and Australian national security perspective. One is obviously to ensure that we're aligned with our peers when it comes to our military capabilities. But the second is also to use these technologies to enhance our ability to demonstrate our compliance with international law and to provide assurance about the moral and ethical authority of the decision-making and processes that the ADF utilises to discharge force or utilise force. So a great example about how UAS can provide that is the use of UAS to provide battle damage assessments. The fact that we can record, that the ADF can record after they release a weapon, the impacts of that weapon in real time to be able to identify what has happened, assists in demonstrating what the impact of that use of force decision was.
Traceability requires that commanders and operators can understand RAS-AI systems and monitor their performance. Other mechanisms for traceability include record-keeping mechanisms that enable after-action review. After-action reviews provide a process for analysing what happened, why it happened, and how it could have been done better.
My name is Beck Marlowe. I just finished Staff College, and as part of that I did the Perry Group option, and we wrote a paper as part of the Perry Group module looking at some of the issues that could be faced by, and challenges that could be faced for future AI procurement within defence. So that was what we were looking at, was what happens when you don't go through the complete process. After action reviews or post-activity reports, those sorts of things, recording what happened and the process that went through, especially with a targeting system, to understand what the process was before you went through that. So we already have those types of reports available to us, so just using those, something that's already exists within our system, and using those to record decisions then protects future investigations and all that sort of stuff, so that you understand why the decision was made in the first place, and then can look at it and review and whether or not changes need to be made to the way decisions are made or changes to the system itself to enable better decisions to be made.
The space of RAS-AI in defence is constantly evolving. This constant change and development mean we have to be able to trace what happened and why.
coming into the future when it comes to recording of RAS-AI recommendations, I think until there is confidence in the system that is assured through our extant frameworks or future developed frameworks, it'd be inappropriate to make decisions based on a recommended course of action from an AI if that decision-making process isn't recorded. That is a question of confidence and competence in using of AI, which Australia will not be at in the near future.
A record-keeping mechanism should be embedded with RAS-AI to enable thorough after-action reviews.
So when it comes to decision making and recording of those decisions, there has to be a recording mechanism of the AI itself, which means that Australia needs access to the IP of that AI to understand how it made the decision and then to test what data was used for making that decision.
To ensure success in the development and use of RAS-AI, the Defence will need to investigate ways of enabling useful record keeping. Record keeping can represent the technology involved, the chain of events, and the humans and machines that were part of the decision making. Through record keeping, Defence will be able to rewind the decision making process to understand what has occurred during the use of RAS-AI and what lessons might be learned. This information should be accessible and understandable for different groups of stakeholders. This may mean different levels of information are provided for experts and non-experts. There are technical hurdles involved when it comes to recording data. However, as the striking blind story demonstrates, overcoming these hurdles is vital.
So how can we make sure that when we employ an AI, we're appropriately recording information so that after the event we can go back and figure out exactly how it made a decision? So all of the data that the AI is sensing is going to need to be recorded, and then data on how exactly it's making decisions. There's going to be technical hurdles with that. So theoretically, with this particular AI, even if we can see exactly how it's making its decisions, the way that it's making its decisions, because it's all based on machine learning, might not make sense to humans. So the information that it's using to figure out that this target is hostile might not be in accordance with what you believe to be common sense. So for example, in engaging these 7 technicals at the bridge, maybe the AI is sucking down data from the internet and it's seen that people are posting less cat videos on YouTube, and it's associated having less cat videos with insurgent activity in this particular area, and therefore it's making that decision.
Developers of RAS-AI must seriously consider how to best enable traceability via record keeping in a way that supports commanders and operators and does not introduce additional burdens.
Currently, we only keep detailed records of our use of RAS-AI systems where something has gone wrong, but they're used currently in a logistics and resupply and reconnaissance role. As they gain more autonomy and lethality, more detailed record keeping may be required. But that needs to be an automated and electronic process. It can't become an administrative burden that must be manually undertaken in battle, or it simply will not happen in war. There might be utility for commanders in the aggregated data that can be taken from all these systems, but we need to apply some common sense as to how much data a commander can take in at any given time. More information available doesn't mean we have more human capacity. The types of records to be kept might depend on the system. A user-level activity log could be useful, commanders' aggregated data could have utility, and for particularly complex or lethal systems, there might be more detailed records than that. However, we should be cautious of overburdening ourselves. Most of our current weapons and most of our current vehicles don't have that black box capability, so we already accept that information is going to be lost in war. And then you throw attrition over the top of that, with many of these RAS-AI systems likely to be considered attritable. We're not going to get all that information back off the battlefield, so we can't make that a requirement. At times, we may have a moral imperative to employ RAS-AI systems, even where their decisions will not be fully recorded, if that will prevent a greater consequence, such as losing a battle or taking human casualties. Uncertainty has always been part of the enduring nature of war, and information has always been lost in battle, and we can't expect that to change through the introduction of RAS-AI systems.
Returning to the striking blind story, we can see that part of what was missing in the Mandela system, as described in the story, was transparency.
The limits of the system was a difficult one because it still hadn't gone through the full process, and with a lot of our systems that we have, like extant systems within defence, there's always a training progression for different types of users. So what the user of the system and what the commander of a system learns about the system is different. So you've got to have those training courses in place. And with the Mandela system, we still hadn't gone through that whole process. So we were still in the middle of doing the test and evaluation process when it was asked to be introduced into service. So in this instance, the commander didn't have the full picture of what the limits and limitations of the system actually were in this instance. And that's something that is important, especially with a targeting system, to understand what those limitations are.
Decisions made using RAS-AI in defence should be traceable and explainable. This means that the technology's data training, theoretical underpinning, decision-making models and actions should be recordable and auditable. Information on events and decisions related to RAS-AI should be accessible and useful for multiple types of stakeholder groups, such as users of the systems, safety certifiers, lawyers, accident investigators, and other non-expert publics. These explanations should help us rewind decision processes and events to understand what occurs and what lessons can be learnt for the future. Importantly, measures taken to achieve this traceability should support commanders and operators to achieve effective, lawful, and ethical outcomes.